Well, here we are. Welcome to the Life After Ministry podcast. We have hit episode number 84, season 6, and we are calling this our season finale. We do a dozen at a time. This conversation is crucial. It's important. This is Steve Woodworth, and you have to listen to this if you are approaching any kind of transition as an individual or an organization. Leadership transitions are some of the most important moments in the life of a ministry. They can protect decades of mission or quietly unravel them. And the truth is, most organizations don't realize which direction they're heading until it's already happening. In this conversation, Steve Woodworth is a fountain of incredible experience and information. We talk about what really happens when leadership is handed from one generation to the next. He's spent several decades observing these moments across Christian nonprofits, and he has seen the patterns that make transitions flourish and the mistakes that cause them to fracture. And in this season finale of the podcast, we step into one of the most honest conversations that we've had yet about succession, about legacy, and what it takes to finish well so the mission can continue long after we're gone. My name is Matt Davis, and this is the Life After Ministry podcast. If you've spent any time around Christian nonprofits or mission organizations, there's a good chance that you've seen Steve's work behind the scenes, whether you realized it or not. Steve, you have spent more than 40 years helping Christian organizations grow, communicate their mission, and navigate leadership. And really, you have been part of this backdrop, whether it's direct marketing, donor services, working with World Vision, during a decade of double-digit growth, and later on working to help build Masterworks, one of the leading agencies that's serving hundreds of ministries around the world. You got a front row seat to something that most people don't talk about very much, and that is leadership successions. And you describe in your book, Lost in Transition, that many of these were beautiful and some of them went sideways. And after watching all of these transitions unfold for more than 30 years, you eventually architected your own succession and decided to write this book, Lost in Transition, to help leaders and boards navigate these moments more wisely. And so, first of all, I just want to say welcome and thank you for being on the Life After Ministry podcast. And I want to just kind of start out with this question of, after watching all of these leadership transitions across ministries for that long, what made you finally sit down and say, okay, someone needs to write this book?
Well, there's a little bit of a funny story, Matt, about that. I had been in this business probably for 25 years, plus 12 years at World Vision. I had seen dozens and dozens of successions, and I'd seen some go well and some go badly. And I figured it was probably 50-50. And I was sitting in an airport talking with a younger leader and that I traveled with at the time. And he said, what do you think makes some go well and some go poorly? And I started to say, well, this is definitely a factor and this is definitely a factor. And I've been thinking about it for quite a while because the ones that went badly were heartbreaking sometimes to me, to watch ministries really struggle and lose tons of momentum. And oftentimes I would think that it didn't have to be that way. I mean, I was involved in some of the ones that you would know, household name ministries, where it didn't go well. And I was involved behind the scenes and I saw what happened. And we can talk more about that, what goes wrong. But anyway, this younger guy says to me, you should write a book on that. And I said, oh, I don't know. I don't have time. And I'm not sure I'm any kind of expert. And when we got back to the office, he had our design department do a mock book cover on succession with a handoff of a baton between two runners. And he gave it to me and I put it on my desk and it sat there for 5 years. I'm not kidding, 5 years. But I never threw it away because I just couldn't quite throw it away. And then one time I was talking to Bill High, who founded the Signatory. He was a leader of the National Christian Foundation. And he told me, you really need to write that book and you need to write it this year because every year you don't write it, there are some ministries that do poorly that could have gone well. And he said, you just need to make it your top priority. And I was well into my succession with my CEO, who's come on behind me. And he told me, I'm totally in favor of it. I'll cover for you. Let's just make it the top priority for this year. And that's when I started interviewing people. I would, I talked to two people, Jim Daly of Focus on the Family and Rich Stearns of World Vision, both of whom have been longtime friends and I thought were very wise. And I asked them if they would help me. That was my fleece. If those two guys both say, yeah, I'll help you, then I'll do it. And they both said yes, and ended up interviewing about 24 leaders, good and bad, and mostly ministry, parachurch ministry leaders, some pastors, some board members, and other, an executive recruiter that I really respect, and just bouncing my ideas and getting more information and more stories that helped shape the book into what it is.
So you've been behind the scenes with dozens and probably hundreds of different ministries and organizations. When you take a step back and you look at all of these stories, are there certain patterns that start to show up? Is there a certain feeling in the room the very first time you walk in or you zoom in? And where are the decision makers and the boards? Like, what's the general tenor? And we usually will say that every single transition, every single succession has its own personality and it has a lot of different levers that can be pulled to make it different. But are there certain pieces of this that start to emerge over the years that you start to see these patterns jump out?
Well, if you mean when leaders getting ready to think about transition, and yeah, so I think the healthiest ones are people that are thinking about it well ahead of time. They're not thinking that this is something I want to do at the end of this year or this summer. It's something they think I've got a few years left, but I want to get serious about it, and I want to help the organization. I want to help the organization make a good, smooth transition. One leader called it a no drama succession, and then there are others where this is a kind of an American mindset construct, I think, from the corporate world. It's the board's job to choose a successor. It's not my job. And so when I'm done, I'll just tell the board I'm going to be done, this summer, or I'll be done at the end of the year. Those are ones that have a lot more trouble. And again, we can talk more about that. But yeah, the ones that are healthy are ones where somebody is not only thinking about it, but they're grooming a successor or more than one potential candidate. And the very best successions, I believe, are ones that are done internally like that over a period of time, where the outgoing CEO and the incoming CEO become friends. There's a mentoring relationship there. The organizational culture is deeply embedded into the new leader. And there isn't that question that is always there when you bring in an outside leader. Will they adapt to the culture? Or will the organization reject them because they just don't fit? It's like, and corporate leaders coming into nonprofits. One senior leader told me is like landing on Mars. That was his experience. He was a experienced corporate CEO coming into World Vision, and he said it was just like I landed on Mars. I didn't even know how to live in this environment.
It's almost like an organ transplant, right? You can actually put the piece in, you can put the new organ in, but and I don't understand the medical part of why a body would reject an organ, but what role does culture and the DNA of an organization play in that succession planning process? How important is that?
Well, culture is huge. I think most failures are either a result of the board making a bad decision, or the organization mistreating the outgoing leader, or a bad culture fit. And the bad culture fit is almost always because the person is brought in from the outside, and they're what I call a shiny object. They have a great resume. They clearly have been a successful leader, but they land in a nonprofit organization, especially if they come from the corporate world, with completely different values about what's important. One leader told me he came from a large multinational corporation, and he said, at my old job, the job was 80% results and 20% relationships. When I came into the nonprofit world, it was the complete reverse. It was 80% relationships and 20% of performance. Not that you didn't have to perform, but if you did it without having strong relationships with people, if you did it trampling on people or with bad morale or using fear as your motivator, it's just not going to work well in a Christian nonprofit. People didn't sign up for that kind of environment where all that matters is the numbers and doesn't matter how you treat people.
I want to walk through. I have a whole kind of lineup of questions I had, but you just said a couple of things I want to pause and dig deeper on. So, number one, you said that it's always better if you can bring somebody up who's already on the inside. So, can we walk through a little bit of how is that best played out? Number one, and then number two, what if you haven't done the work ahead of time to actually develop that person, and now you are in a position where you're forced to bring somebody in from the outside, and how do you, and I don't even want to say guarantee success, because I don't feel like there's a guarantee of success when we're talking about humans, but how do you mitigate for some of that and do the best possible job you can to keep continuity in the organization?
Well, let me answer your first question just quickly. Where the way it's done well is what I started to say a few minutes ago, is you pick somebody internally that you think has the potential. This is what I did. I picked two people and I was grooming them. One of them opted out after a while as they got to know the job. In the stories in the book, and another one opted out right toward the end because he decided, I don't think I really want to be in the business of running a marketing agency. I think I want to be a consultant on my own and build my own little team, and not have all the drama of a substantial size company. And meanwhile, I had spotted a guy that was younger and two levels down, and I thought he might be the best leader and manager that we have, and I'll never know what he can do if I don't have him reporting directly to me. So he was reporting through someone else. I pulled him out, had him report directly to me. Shortly after that, I put him on our executive leadership team, and I coached him and mentored him and spent time with him. And we talked about, do you want this? And if so, what do I think you need to change? He happened to come from the corporate world. He came from an organization where if he didn't hit his numbers that month, he had to fire some people to make sure he hit his numbers the next month. We're not like that. We're not even like the traditional ad agency that lays off people every time you lose a big account. We're always trying to hang on to our people and value them. They're our greatest assets. So, like in my case with Brian Brown, my successor, we became friends, and I mentored him and I taught him the business, and pretty soon he was taking things off my plate and he was doing great. And I was thinking, I'm not sure you're going to be able to do that. I'll let you try. And I just promised, anything you think you can do, I'll let you take it and you run with it and try it. And he excelled at everything that he did. So that became a situation where we became really good friends, so that when the time came that I could tell he could take over and we would be just fine. He didn't want me to leave either because we were such good friends and he was so used to working together with me. And now that transition has happened a year ago almost. And I'm still doing some really high value things for him that he says nobody else could do that. And I don't have the time right now to learn everything that you do. So as long as you can keep doing some of those things for me, you've got a tremendous amount of value. That's the good internal. If you don't have any internal candidates, it's too bad if you didn't try. I mean, I understand some people try. I had somebody when I was about 50 that I thought was the person. I invested in them for years. And as the company grew bigger and bigger, I saw more and more that this company was outgrowing the person's capability. Everybody loved him. He was a really good leader from the standpoint of people and relationships, as good as anybody I've seen. But his ability to handle the big challenges and to sort of see around the corners of what was coming just wasn't working. So I was young enough that I still had time to work on it. And I didn't find Brian until I was in my early 60s. And by then I was starting to feel like it's getting late here in the game. I've got to find somebody. I don't believe in 65 as a retirement year. I think that's an American construct that you don't see anywhere else in the world. But I did feel like I've got to get help. I've got the hard things that are landing on my plate. I need somebody else that can take a substantial part of that load. So, it comes down to if you haven't found anybody and it's because you didn't try, well, I don't want to say shame on you, but it's too bad for the organization. Right. You've let the organization down in a way. And boards should be challenging CEOs too. Who are you grooming to take over? And then if that doesn't work, then you got to do a search. You got to go out and find somebody. Um, in a more complex, larger organization, you probably need to hire an executive recruiter. There are some really good ones out there that specialize in Christian ministries and pastoral leadership and things like that. And yet the one that I respect the most from sort of the last 25 years of executive recruiting, I talked to him while I was working on the book, and I said, "Tell me honestly what you think the success rate is of the people that you've recruited." And he said, "Probably about 50%." And I said,
Mm.
"Okay, that's what everybody that I have asked has said, that their observation is in the ministry world, about 50% are successful." I don't know enough pastoral successions to say that that's the success rate there. I assume it's probably a little better.
Hmm.
And that's what, and that's a really good executive recruiter, because
Right.
I'm guessing that there's about a 30% success rate when you use external candidates, and a 70% success rate when you groom and raise up, maybe even 80% when you raise up an internal successor, because that person's so well known that by the time there's a consensus from the team and the outgoing leader that this is the person, then you have time to invest in that person, help them to grow in the areas that they need. I mean, we made a list of the things Brian needed to learn and
Yeah.
do and all that. And then everybody on the team, in a really holy moment, made a commitment to help Brian to fill out this list and to get all these
Wow.
experiences. And it was, it was a really special moment where when we went around the room and every single person said, "Yeah, I believe Brian's the guy, and I'm committed to helping him." He got choked up. He couldn't respond for a few minutes to that.
I like that. Mostly because I think the person who's coming into that position feels like it's all on me. I have some big shoes to fill. And if they actually felt like they were being supported from the very beginning, that this is a collaborative approach, the buck stops with them, but we're together as a team to try to fulfill this together. I think that's powerful. The other
Yeah,
thing
and
you said that
that wasn't even at
oh,
the handoff either. That was well before the handoff. That was
well,
when
yeah,
he was the appointed candidate that we were all going to groom into the job, and it was still a couple years that he was COO and then president, and then now he's CEO.
love it. You also said one of the ways that things can go sideways is mistreating the outgoing leader. Why is that important, and what does it look like?
The outgoing leader, I don't care how long they've been thinking about it, how much they've been working on it, and I'll speak for myself because I've been in this process for 6 years. This is an emotionally charged time in a person's life, and it's hard. It's hard to give up. It's hard to face your mortality and your declining energy and the things that, you've used to relish doing. Now you find too draining. You don't like to do them anymore. That's all hard. And then I think that everybody who goes through this has days where they wonder, am I doing the right thing? What am I going to do? Who am I going to be? Who am I without that role? No matter how much you've tried to keep your identity grounded in the Lord and not in what you do, there is, especially if you've been a CEO or senior pastor, if you've been the leader, then that becomes part of your identity. And especially if you've done it for a long time. In my case, I've been CEO for 30 years. And I had times where I felt like I just don't really know who I am or what my place is. Now, thank God I've got a guy in Brian that I could share that with, and we'd talk about it, and he'd say, "Okay, this is where your value is right now, and it's not in how hard you work, it's not in how many hours you work, it's doing these things where there's a crisis that you can handle in a 1 hour meeting from 30 years of experience that nobody else would know what to do with. Those things are just incredibly valuable." So but what happens all too often is the younger leader thinks, I must be weak if I still need this person, and
Good.
I got to
Yeah.
show myself, and I've got my own vision, and I want to change some things, and I want to not worry about how that person's feeling. So they start to move too fast. They start to disrespect the outgoing leader, or even worse yet, the board decides that the leader's done. They take the corporate model of, if you're the chairman of Disney and you've stepped down for a new chairman, you're out. Like, you're not going to hang around and be on the board. And and continue to speak into the corporate strategy. And so we bring that mentality into ministries. I've seen this happen a lot where boards have told a leader, okay, we're going to make this transition at the end of the year. And the leader says, but I don't want to leave at the end of the year. I want to work part-time. And I thought we talked about me continuing on and relating to major donors. And no, we've been talking about it as a board and we really think that you should be done. I've seen two men that I interviewed were in their 70s and had been out of the role for 5 to 10 years and got choked up telling me their story about how they felt disrespected by their board and they were pushed out. And in those cases, they didn't do anything to disparage the organization. But every time I've seen a leader be disrespected from a parachurch organization and leave early and leave without grace and without, really warm, fuzzy relationships still in place, they lose donors. They lose major donors. Because if you've been a CEO of a parachurch ministry for any length of time, some of those donors give because of you, because they like you and they believe in you and your vision, and you've had an impact on their lives as a friend. And those donors, like I went to one CEO who was retiring ministry that we had supported for a long time, and I said, "Tell me why we should support the organization going forward, because I really feel now that you're leaving that a lot of why we've given is because of you and the ministry you've had in our lives." And he gave this great speech for about 5 minutes on how the best days of the organization are ahead and how we looked long and far, prayed so hard, found this guy. I know he's God's appointed leader. And we continued to give, and we still to this day do. Now, if he would have just been sort of lukewarm, like, well, just need to pray and see what God lays on your heart, I don't know if we still would have kept giving. And if he would have told me, well, actually, I'm not the guy to ask because I'm hurting right now because of the way I've been treated and I didn't really want to leave this fast, we would have definitely stopped giving. And that happens a lot. I've seen organizations take a 50% hit on their income because so many major donors quit giving. And it's because they figured out that the outgoing CEO was really unhappy and was not strongly supportive of the organization anymore because of the way they were treated.
So that's a cautionary tale for the board and the decision makers in the organization as they're thinking about what goodbye looks like for that leader, for the CEO, the president, executive director. Speak to the person who's considering their own retirement. We're talking to several organizations and pastors and leaders they're on the brink. They're about to cross over into the unknown of life after succession there. And there's fear, there's anxiety, there's exhaustion. What can you tell them? What do you say to that person to say, here's the next best step, or it's going to be okay on the other side? Or would you even say any of that?
I would say the very best situations I've seen where people are the happiest is they continue to have some kind of a role. Maybe they take a sabbatical for 6 months, but they come back and they continue to carry major donor relationships, and they deliberately over time try to transfer all the goodwill that they have to the new leader. So they travel with the new leader to go meet with donors, and they talk up the new leader, and they even I'll tell you one particular organization. It's called True Face. It's a discipleship ministry, and the new CEO Robbie Angle reached out to the former CEO Bruce McNichol after Bruce had finished, and he had finished well, and he had a very, very warm relationship with Robbie. And Robbie got an opportunity to bring their discipleship ministry to a country. I can't remember what it was, some country in Africa or someplace like that. And Robbie has 8 kids at home. And he said, I can't do this kind of thing. I can't start doing international travel. So he called Bruce and said, would you be willing to do this and see where God leads? And then Bruce took off, and pretty soon he's traveling around the world with his wife and taking this discipleship ministry international as the former CEO, working for the new CEO. And they're just loving it, really appreciate each other. They're great friends. And that's the very best. Now, if that doesn't happen a lot, it's wonderful when it does. It's happening between Brian and me over this last couple of years. The next best is to have a transition period where you do transfer that goodwill, where maybe the person's paid part-time to travel and introduce the new CEO to the donors and churches and key constituencies, whatever those are. There was one organization that was ready to move a founder out, and she was upset about it, and she asked me if I would talk to the board chair, and I did, and I told the board chair this is a big mistake because this organization is very dependent on her relationships with churches and donors. And he said, well, I feel like my role as the board chair is to facilitate, not to lead. And I said, this is a time when I think you're going to have to lead, because this is an existential threat to the whole ministry. If a lot of donors were to bail, you could be out of business. And he listened to me, and he did lead. And I had a lunch with the founder, the successor, and the board chair last year. And it was just a fun time to hear them tell their story to me directly of how that intervention had really helped them to stay on the right path. Now, having said all that, there are times where the leader doesn't want to stick around. They've got grandkids, they've got something else they want to do, they got a new ministry idea in their head, they want to write a book, that's okay. I just say my bottom line would be go to something, like have something. Don't just retire and find yourself at home in the first week thinking, what am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. Or waiting for your wife to tell you, I want you to hang that shelf in the closet. I've been talking about, and you've gone from leading a global ministry to hanging a shelf in a closet. That's pretty hard transition to do, from one week to the next. So I strongly, and I think pretty much everybody, you guys, I'm sure would agree that whenever possible, if you get fired and you don't have any notice and you haven't had time to think about it, then gosh, you're stuck. And that's got to be one of the most painful things. I've heard some of your story, and that's got to be really hard. But to whatever extent you possibly can, plan ahead and go to something, not just away from where you've been.
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations are looking at, well, what's next for the organization? We want to just be able to pause in the middle of that and say, also, the person who's leaving the organization needs to think about what's next for them as well. It's not just, will the organization survive? We want thriving leaders on the other side. You have to be able to have a vision for what you're transitioning into yourself.
Right. Yeah.
I'm curious what you think about the uniqueness of what makes a transition or a succession for a founder of an organization. Why? What's the nuance? What makes that a little bit different in terms of succession planning?
That's the hardest, I think, of all. Is founders have the identity problem probably several times stronger than somebody who's just been a CEO amongst several other people before them. I think we're all just stewards of our time and our responsibilities. Even as a founder, as a founder of our organization, I tell myself all the time, I'm just a steward for a time. And everybody, even the greatest leaders in the Bible, Moses, David, others, they had a point in history which was relatively short when you look over the whole scope of history. So our time in our area of responsibility is limited. And God has that organization is ultimately His. And if you want to think carefully and rightly, you need to think about yourself as a steward. Even if you're a founder, God gave me this idea. God sent me the right people, and it turned into something, and it was wonderful. Now it's time that I give it into the next generation. The legacy is what you leave behind you. And a good legacy is better and stronger when you're gone than when you were running it. And so I think that founders, though, most of the blow-ups that have happened, most of the disastrous transitions are where founders can't let go, and they have to have hard conversations with board members that their board members are saying, you have got to bring in somebody. I know of one organization where they brought in I think it was at least 5 or 6 people, and the founder always found a reason within a year or two that this person is not the right person. And then they went on to the next one, and then they went on to the next one, and and that organization really blew up. I mean, just it didn't go out of business, but it could have. It dropped by about 50% in income because the founder was very unhappy, and clearly so to the public, that cared about the organization. Yeah, it's hard. Get people around you who you can talk to about it. Ideally, people who've either been through it or who are consultants. There are consultants out there who specialize, like you guys, in helping people through these things. I think it's a psychological dynamic that you really can't help. The sense of identity and loss of identity that comes from moving from being a CEO and especially being a founder to no longer having that responsibility it's a huge loss. It's or something to grieve, and you practically need a counselor to go with you through it and help you keep reminding you of the reality. You're doing the right thing. You're doing the very thing you wanted to do. You've been working on it for years, and you're doing the noble thing, and the organization will continue on, hopefully for generations, because you did this really well.
Even if you know it's coming, the identity piece is still a difficult pill to swallow.
Yeah.
There's something else, and we're blessed to be able to call you an advisor of ours and friend of Ministry Transitions. So I'm just hitting you with some of these are things that we're seeing more and more of. What about the transition and the succession in the family? So not just the organizational family, but you have a father, son, or a parent, child that now they're passing the ministry down to the next generation. Where are missteps possible, and how do you avoid those?
I don't know a lot of those. I mean, I've only seen a few, but what I've seen is that it can be fine if the successor is obvious, but if there are 2 or 3 siblings that all want the job, that's the messiest of all situations.
Right.
I mean, like, dad has to choose a favorite or mom has to choose a favorite amongst the kids is devastating in so many ways. There are people out there who specialize in that. I'm not sure if you guys have a unique specialty in that, but boy, I think a family-owned business or a ministry that is going to transition from a father to a son or daughter really needs outside help.
Yeah. When we take on a spectrum of gone too soon and stayed too long, what can we say about these kind of contrasting dynamics when we're looking at those different possibilities?
Well, gone too soon, I use to refer to those people who don't plan their successions out ahead of time, and they just decide, I'm really, really tired, I'm burned out, and I just want to be done with this. So I'm gonna be done by the end of the year. And that's not doing the best you can do for the organization. Staying too long is like the founder I described that kept going through one potential successor after another. Each one was the COO over the whole organization, and the person who actually ended up taking over the organization against the founder's will, the founder tried to stop it, tried to get rid of him. The board decided we've seen too much of this. We don't believe it's ever going to work out peacefully. So we're just going to side with the new, younger leader. We have to make a change. We want you to still be on the board, et cetera, et cetera. Person got upset and left. I think if he had been more willing to really invest in his successors or his ultimate successor and stick around, that could have been a really good relationship. So you shouldn't stay too long either. You should check yourself. Like I listened to the Kurt Swindoll podcast recently that you did, and he describes how his dad kind of lost a sense of vision for the church, and even though he'd been there a long time and very successful. I'd heard another one too, I can't remember who it was, but you had another person on who talked about having a clear sense that I don't have a vision for this church anymore. So even though they'd been there a long time, they felt like this is a clear sign that my time is done. And God bless people like that who can honestly sense the leading of the Holy Spirit, that the anointing that I had for this particular ministry is gone or is leaving, and I'm being led to do something else, and then following that. I think God doesn't create confusion and chaos, and he would like people to get along, be peaceful. I think humility is absolutely essential. I write about that in the book. Humility on the parts of all the people involved to
Yep.
to to realize as an older leader, I don't have the energy that I used to have. I can't do everything I used to do, and I've got to find a younger person to train and to help transition to. That takes a lot of humility, and then to watch him do things that I wouldn't do that way,
Right.
and not intervene, or keep my comments totally private just to him, so no
Hmm.
one else knows that I disagreed with a decision. That's
Yep.
been the kind of thing that I've done, and that's helped. It's helped quite a bit with Brian.
What do we do with the board? Boards are a very interesting piece. They can make or break the entire succession planning process. It's hard for us to even reach boards because there aren't these gatherings. It's not like there's an elder board or board of directors conference. So where do they assemble? How do we get information to them? Oftentimes it's a very, very part-time thing until something goes wrong, and then it's all encompassing and takes over all of their life. And at that point, it's too late. What are some of the essential questions that boards need to be asking themselves, or even practices that they need to be doing to help? What's their role in ensuring a healthy succession?
Well, let me first say that I think that one of the things that goes wrong most often when a transition is done very poorly is that the board doesn't get the help that they need. Boards rightly think the single most important responsibility we have is to choose the CEO. That's true. That is a gigantic part of the board's role. The mistake they make is they think because that's our most important role, we must know how to do it. So let's do it. And they don't realize they don't know how to do it. They might spend 5 days a year or 7 days a year thinking about the organization. The people that work there that are in senior leadership think about it 365 days a year. Or if they're really good, they might think about it 335 days a year because they take vacation and actually can forget about it for a few
Right.
weeks at a time, a couple weeks at a time. But most people, especially CEOs, you're never really away from the job. So I strongly recommend that boards involve the outgoing CEO unless they've not been successful, and it's a nasty kind of transition. But as long as the board is not at odds with the CEO, they involve the CEO in the process of helping choose the successor, and they involve the senior staff. And even if the CEO's failed, there's got to be people in the senior staff, the CFO, the HR person, or other people who understand what's needed in the organization better than the board does. And so I believe the board should have a process, a deliberate process to keep the senior staff involved. In the case of Rich Stearns at World Vision, I use this as a case study. And I talked to the board chair and I talked to the chair of the succession committee at World Vision in order to use this story and Rich wanted to make sure that everybody saw it the same way he did. But he came to them and gave them like 3 years notice. And then he asked to read the job description when they were sending it out to an executive recruiter. And he thought it was all wrong and he rewrote it. And the board took that job description that he rewrote and used that. And then they asked him if he wanted to be involved in interviewing the final candidates. And he did. And he asked if he could bring along the VP of HR. And they said, sure. And they had a meeting, don't remember where it was, but they brought in all the candidates to one central location where the board was going to meet. And they spent time with each of the candidates. And at the end of it, Rich felt like these are all people from the corporate world that have great resumes. Some of them made a lot of money, but none of them know what it is to run an international organization that deals with abject poverty. None of them have ever been in situations of abject poverty. but I've got this COO that I brought in to run the day-to-day operations of the organization. And he doesn't know how to do the external stuff, but I believe he's capable of doing it. So Rich began to advocate for the COO who had been there for just a few years. And over and against all these flashy corporate types that were interested in the job, Rich just really dug in and said, I think that Edgar is the right person. And ultimately, the board decided to give the job to Edgar Sandoval. He's been in the job now 5 or 6 years, and World Vision's gone from $1 billion to $1.4 billion after being flat for quite a while before that. That is not easy to grow $1 billion organization by 40%. And Edgar, if you meet him, he's just the nicest guy, and he's the staff love him. Everybody was really happy that he was getting the job, and it was the right decision. So all that to say, boards need consultants. They need staff involved. They need help. They don't really know how to do that job. That is their single most important thing they'll do probably during their tenure on the board, each one.
Yeah. I already know there's several people I'm going to be sending this conversation to afterwards, and some of the folks that we're working with. So thank you for the wisdom. I want to wrap with just one question, because we have, I think we're going to need to do this again. Are there things that are different today in the world of succession planning that weren't present 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago? The succession, have we always just had these dynamics, or is there something new that you see today that hasn't been around in the last decade or two?
Well, I haven't thought of that before, but I think the obvious thing is the pace of change is so fast, and the role of technology is so much bigger that I see a lot of corporate types being brought in to run larger Christian organizations because they have a comfort level with technology and with leading change. And as I said, that's fraught with danger, because if that person isn't a good fit with the culture, it could blow up. Edgar Sandoval is a great object lesson, where he was brought in not to be the successor, but to be the COO and run the day-to-day operations. He was one of the most senior people at Procter & Gamble. So, very accomplished executive in building teams and innovation. Procter & Gamble's exceptional at innovation. And he adapted to the culture, and they had the opportunity to see that he had adapted to the culture, and the people around him really appreciated him. And so he made a very smooth transition into that CEO role. But I think, 30 years ago, pretty much everybody that would have been considered to be a CEO of World Vision would have come from Youth for Christ or, some other ministry organization. That was what I saw happen when I was there. And then the last two have been from the corporate world. And I think they've both been fantastically successful. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that, Matt.
Yeah. Steve, I want people, if they're in this season of transition, considering their own or looking at their organization, trying to figure out how do we do this. Your book is required reading, and I want to be able to point people in the right direction. In fact, if you go to our website, ministrytransitions.com, and there's a tab there under resources that says books we love, and yours tops the list. We love it, but I'm assuming we can get it on Amazon and all of the other wonderful places. But where else might they connect with you and what you're up to today?
I have a newsletter on LinkedIn just on this subject. If you can just look up Steve Woodworth on LinkedIn, and you can find the newsletter there and subscribe to it. Also, you can message me through there. You can go to masterworks.agency is our website for my company, and you can find me there and send me an email.
That's good. Steve, thank you for joining us on the Life After Ministry podcast. I'm sure this is our first conversation on here, and not our last. So thank you for jumping on.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Appreciate what you guys do.
If you've been listening through this season, you've probably noticed a theme. Transitions are never just organizational. They are deeply, deeply personal. This conversation with Steve Woodworth reminds us that succession is not simply about choosing the next leader. It's about protecting the people, protecting the culture, and the mission that God entrusted to an organization in the first place. And when it's done well, that next chapter can be even stronger than the last. I firmly believe it, and we've seen it. Now, this conversation closes out our current season of the Life After Ministry podcast. We're so grateful that you've walked through these stories with us. We've seen tremendous growth. We've seen incredible conversations, emails, comments, and we appreciate every single one of them. If you are a leader or a board member or a ministry or a Christian-owned business and you're navigating an upcoming transition, whether it's for your organization or even for yourself, I'm going to invite you to visit us at ministrytransitions.com so you can learn more. You can see some of the many resources that we have. You can even schedule an absolutely confidential conversation about what comes next. I'll give you a little inside secret. I would say 50% of the conversations that we have with Ministry Transitions, they happen from a car in a parking lot, because these are deeply personal. They are oftentimes very confidential and very private. And so we honor those conversations. We look forward to them and helping. And so we want to be able to help the next generation of leaders take their place. We want to help the current generation to figure out what is that next season for them. And we want to invite you, if you have been moved, if you know a pastor or ministry leader, somebody who has gone through it and lived to tell about it, or they're in the midst of it right now and they need some help, and you want to say, I want to support that person, we encourage you to go to our website and you will be able to make a donation. You can even make a donation on their behalf, and we will help them every way we possibly can. So thank you for listening. Until next season, keep leading with courage, with clarity, and following Jesus.